Hey, Nexus. I will actually copy 3 different links. This is the reaction for October, November, and December of 2024.
My name is Jayesh. I'm from Mumbai, India. This story is from the monsoon season of the year 2019. I had just completed my college courses and planned to spend the rest of the vacation at my native village. My village is situated in the western coastal region of India known as Konkan. My family owns an ancestral house there, though we live far away in the city. We visit that house only on occasions like festivals. This time, I wasn't accompanied by my parents since they were busy with their work. I was joined by my college friends, Rahul, Bren, and Payel. My parents reluctantly agreed to allow me to travel and stay there when I promised that I wouldn't mess things up and reasoned that I was grown up, plus accompanied by friends. After a full day's journey via train, we finally reached the destination. We were picked up by Uncle Datta, who was our house caretaker. My father had called him 2 days earlier and told him to prepare everything for our stay. We arrived at the house by evening, and we were already tired at that point due to the long trip. We were invited to have dinner at my uncle's place, so we went with him there. After having dinner, we stayed for a while talking and didn't realize that it was already 12 at night. My friends and I were ready to head back, but Uncle requested us to stay at his place for the night since it was already too late to head back. And also, the night of the new moon, meaning no moon, would be visible in the night sky. Uncle Datta said that it's dangerous to go outside as many animals and other things come out in the dark. I reluctantly agreed to stay there, so he prepared us mattresses on the floor to sleep. It was a comforting cool temperature, so I immediately fell asleep. But around 1 a.m., I woke up startled by the creaking sound of a door being opened. I saw Uncle heading outside with a torch in his hand and a shawl covered around his body. He closed the door slowly from outside so that nobody would wake up. I thought he went to the toilet, which was next to the house. I remained awake and waited for him to return. The room was silent other than the steady ticking of the clock, and mostly dim due to the low lamplight. Half an hour later, Uncle still didn't come back through the door. Something is wrong, I thought to myself. My friends were deep asleep. I felt that waking them up would make everyone panic. So I quietly turned to Bren, who was sleeping just next to me. I moved over next to him and called him in a low tone. "Bren, wake up." Bren was still in his dreams, so I shook him a little and slightly more loudly said, "Wake up, something is wrong." Bren immediately opened his eyes in response and turned towards me. I put a finger on my lips and said, "Shh, don't be loud or else you will wake the others up. Something is wrong. Uncle has not returned yet. It's been an hour now." Bren spoke clearly, still half asleep. He must have something important, so he went outside. But what important work does he have to do at midnight? I said with a worried tone. Without saying anything else, I slowly stood up and headed for the door. Bren sat up and was watching me, looking confused about what I was doing. I grabbed a flashlight on the table next to the door and slowly cracked the door. There was a creaking noise from the old hinges, but no one else woke up from it. I went outside, and even though I was wearing a hoodie, the air felt frigid and sent a chill down my spine. I turned on the flashlight and began looking around for Uncle. I walked over to the toilet and searched inside and outside, but nobody was there. The environment outside was completely dark and cold, with the sounds of crickets and frogs filling in the silence. After searching around the house, I found no sign of him anywhere. I don't know how I dared to venture further out, because the surroundings were dense trees and bushes that are home to many wild and deadly animals, but I decided to keep looking for him. I was walking slowly and carefully, looking and listening and moving my flashlight around to check my surroundings properly. Soon, I reached the rice fields owned by our family, since I thought Uncle might be there. As the tall grass covered most of my lower body, I took every step carefully, aiming my flashlight at the ground to avoid stepping on something that could be dangerous. When I reached the middle of the field, I called out, "Uncle, are you there?" Turning a different direction each time. I called loudly 2 times, but there was no answer. But suddenly, I froze and stood there still after I noticed that the sounds of the crickets and amphibians had suddenly stopped, and there was a complete, dead silence. That usually means a predator or some animal was around. I heard the rustling in the grass and movements around the field. I moved my flashlight in the direction the sound came. I saw grass rustling. Then I did a dumb thing. I picked up a stone and threw it in the direction the sound was coming from. When the stone hit the ground, the rustling grass stopped. I went closer to inspect and check if I might have killed or injured that animal or something. But out of nowhere, a wild boar rushed towards me and tackled me to the ground. It was an ambush and I fell for it. I couldn't fight since I was unarmed, holding just a flashlight in my hand. It looked very dangerous and I was scared for my life. Its impenetrable black skin covered with hair, its sharp tusks ready to rip skin and flesh, the saliva dripping from its mouth, and the deadly gaze of its yellow eyes, which I could see with the glow of the flashlight. I sat up but remained frozen and scared from the shock. I had never encountered such a huge animal in my life. Even when my parents warned me not to mess with the boars, it seems as though the boar was angry at me because I hit it with the stone. When I tried to get up, the boar screeched loudly, which literally shook my eardrums. But then I suddenly heard the sound of a hand drum coming from somewhere, and it was getting louder, like it was moving towards me. The hand drums were instruments used by the villagers to scare away boars and birds from the fields. The wild boar took a step back and then ran off. I was drenched in sweat and I was about to pee my pants, but let out a sigh of relief when the boar was out of sight. I made it up onto my feet and turned around to see a dark figure standing at some distance. The figure was wearing a shawl around its body, holding a hand drum in its hand and a lamp in the other. I thought it was my uncle, so I ran towards him, but slowed to a stop as I got closer. I looked again, and that person was not my uncle. What am I seeing? I thought. The figure was at least 7 feet tall and wearing a brown shawl covering its body and head. Its hands were muscular and completely pale and gray. Instead of having a face, it was covered with darkness and had 2 shiny blue dots glowing in the place of eyes. I paused for a moment and was astonished, yet scared. I began to slowly walk backwards, but then the figure spoke in a deep and echoing voice. Go back. I fell unconscious on the spot. The next morning when I came to, I was at Uncle's house and surrounded by my friends, my uncle, and the doctor. Before I could say something, Uncle informed me that he found me lying unconscious outside of the fields by a villager. They knew I was missing and everyone was searching for me. I explained to Uncle that I left the house in search of him and told him about my near-death encounter with the boar and meeting that mysterious tall figure. My uncle then told my friends and I that the figure that I encountered was a keeper. He told us that the keepers are the guardian entities which protect the fields from unwanted presences and wild animals, and bless the fields with fertility and fortune. In exchange for the protection of the keepers, we break a coconut outside the fields on every new moon night as an offering to them. My uncle went on to tell us that he went to the fields that night to perform the offering. After listening to this, my friends and I were in total shock over whether to believe this or not. But what I encountered that night made me a believer. I realized that there are many entities out there, and some come with a motive to destroy, and some to protect.
Oh yeah! Drop what you're doing and head to...
Favorite horror story channel, and I have a story for you. A true story, and it just recently happened to me. I had a pretty rough upbringing, to put it lightly. My mother was negligent, and my father was absent. However, I have an aunt who I am very close to, and I feel like she's more like my mother than my actual mother. After I graduated, I moved in with my aunt, as she had kindly offered me a place to stay. It worked out well, because the place I ended up working at was only 5 minutes away from where she lived, so I couldn't pass up the opportunity. She lives in a really nice area. It's a bit of an elderly community, I'll admit it, but it's well kept and the people there are kind. Her place isn't huge, but it isn't tiny either. It's got an upstairs and a downstairs, but it's only got 2 bedrooms, and it's a condominium. My bedroom is very small, but it's the perfect size for me because I'm quite a minimalist. However, my room is right next to the window to the outside, and that's where the story truly begins. At first, I didn't really notice anything odd. Occasionally, I would hear scratching noises against the window or whistling, but I thought it was likely just trees, since there are some near the window. I figured it could also be just normal noises from the house or from outside that I wasn't used to yet. For a while, I didn't even pay too much attention to all the noises. After all, I worked the overnight shift, so by the time I got back and went to bed, it was morning, so I'd go to sleep with the birds chirping. But on my days off, or on the days I wanted to get a little more sleep before work, I'd hear all that constant whistling and scratching against the window. I tried not to be paranoid about it, but things only escalated from there. I have a few plants by my window, so it's a little difficult to see past them. One night, the scratching began again, and I suppose curiosity got the better of me, and I just had to see what it was. I walked over to the window and looked outside, curious about what I'd see. It was so dark I couldn't see much at first. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw the faint outline of a person standing there, whistling. I thought it was odd, really odd. I mean, it was maybe 2 or 3 in the... Most people would be asleep, yet this person was outside, whistling. That didn't explain the scratching, though, until I noticed the person going up to everyone's windows, scratching against them with their fingernails, and even tapping the windows sometimes. I assumed to try and get people's attention. Most people would probably freak the hell out at that point, but for some reason, I wasn't really scared, honestly. I mean, sure, this creepy person is trying to be creepy, but I was safe where I was inside. Even so, I pulled out my phone to call the police while keeping an eye on that person to explain what they looked like to the police. It was probably the light from my phone that alerted the person, who I now noticed was a man, but he turned towards me and began sprinting over to my window. I kept my composure, still trying to explain the situation to the police, but the look on the man's face was something I can only describe as deranged. As he began banging on my window, I simply watched. He kept attempting to break it or at least scare me by repeatedly hitting the window over and over again. I rolled my eyes and told the police officer that he was banging on my window now, and they told me that help would be there soon. Around this time, I began mentally thinking about how long this had been happening, for months at least. It didn't happen immediately after I arrived, but I'd been living there for about 7 months at that point, and this man was seemingly doing all this for at least 4 or 5 months, maybe even longer. I don't know how nobody here didn't notice or didn't call the police before I had, or maybe they did, I don't know. The man was still banging against the window, but I had been spacing out and thinking and hadn't looked back at him. I turned around again when I noticed he had a gun in his hand, which he was now slamming against my window. I thought maybe it wasn't loaded. Maybe it was just for show. Or maybe that was just what I was trying to tell myself since I was now afraid. The officer on the line must have heard me gasp because they asked me what I saw, and I immediately told them that the man had a gun, and he was now trying to break my window with it. The officer told me to hide in the bathroom if I was able to, and I did. All the noise woke up my aunt, and I frantically explained the situation to her as the both of us hid in the bathroom. It was agonizing waiting for the police, but finally, I heard the police cars outside and let out a sigh of relief. It was faint, but I heard one gunshot, then shouting. It lasted about 5 minutes before it quieted down. After everything had settled and the officer on the line told me it was safe to go outside, I was greeted with a very shocking scene. The man who I saw, he was alive, but he had a gunshot wound, likely because he was attempting to use his gun on the police, and they fired back. At least, that's what I think happened. He was unconscious, but what the police found on his person was nothing short of terrifying. The man had a journal on him, where he had details on every person who lived in the area. Details from what they looked like, to their assumed age, and why he thought they'd be a good target. So, my theory that he was just trying to creep us out was wrong. The man was likely attempting to lure someone out and kill them. He also had a few other weapons on him, and the man wasn't lanky or anything. He actually had muscle to him. While the police were explaining what they saw in the journal, I managed to catch a glimpse of his entry on me. It was disgusting. He thought I was much younger than I am, maybe only 17 or 18. I'm in my mid-20s, but to his credit, I don't look it. And he described me as cute, but worth taking out because I was such an easy target. It made me sick to my stomach that he stalked everyone here, essentially, but was only stopped from hurting someone because of me. What would have happened if I didn't call the police? The police confirmed that the other people living there had made complaints, but whenever they showed up, the man was nowhere to be found. It was likely only luck that he saw me and attempted to try and break in. As scary as it was, I like to think that it saved someone's life, or at least prevented them from being the ones to experience that. I don't know why he tried to approach me specifically, or why I was the only one he directly approached. I took one quick glance at the guy, and he was shoved in the back of the police car, just to see if I recognized him. And I did. He was one of the men who, during the day, would walk around all of the buildings while walking his dog. During the day, he didn't do much except walk his dog, and he seemed friendly enough. But at night, he tried terrorizing many people around the complex, apparently planning on taking people out one by one. I'm still in contact with the police, as I officially gave my statements, and may even have to appear in court. I'm not sure. I don't know what he will be charged with, since it's still early in the process. But I figured that the journal alone has a mountain of evidence regarding his intentions. But I'll never be able to forget that journal, how detailed it was, and how he sincerely seemed to have a plan for every single person on that list.
I am 17 years old now, but when this incident happened, I was 15 years old. It was a sunny day when my family and I decided to go to my aunt's house to hang out with family. I was very excited because I loved my aunt's house, and I loved spending time with my cousin. When we got there, my cousin and I planned a sleepover, so we went to the nearby store and bought some snacks. But when we were going back, a man called out to us. When we looked back, we saw a nice-looking man was there holding a pack of chips, which we dropped mistakenly. I went and took the pack of chips from him, and he gave us a genuine smile. I didn't think much about it after. By the time we got back, it was night already, and we were picking movies to watch. It was always comfortable in my aunt's house because she let the cool air flow in through the door. The main entrance has 2 doors and a space in between them. The first door is made of iron bars that air can flow through, and the second door is a normal wooden door, a few meters behind the iron door. My aunt always keeps the wooden door open so that the air can come through, but keeps the iron door locked for security. As we finally started to watch a movie, we heard a soft thud coming from the corridor between the main doors. An eerie feeling came over me, and I immediately asked my cousin if she had locked the iron door or not. She said she couldn't remember, so she got up and went to check it. A minute went by, but I didn't hear anything, so I got up to check on her, and my body froze. A man had broken into the house, and my cousin was unconscious on the floor. The man had a mask on, and he started to chase me. I ran and started shouting to alarm everyone that there was an intruder in the house. The man got faster, but I managed to run into the kitchen and lock the door behind me. Aunt were also there. They were scared, and our mobile phones were kept in another room. The man kept banging on the door, and when the door didn't budge, I heard him walk away. I couldn't leave my cousin alone, so I gathered all the courage I had left, took a plate from the kitchen racks, opened the door, and rushed to the man. As he looked back, I smashed a plate onto his head, and blood started to pour down his head. I quickly grabbed my phone and called 911 and went to check on my cousin. I sprinkled some water on her face and she woke up. Fortunately, nothing serious happened to her. The police soon arrived and arrested the man. When they took the mask off of the man, I was shocked to see that it was the man who helped us when we went to the store. The police confirmed that he was following us and hid until we got into the house. He was a kidnapper who kidnapped young girls and sold them for money. I'm just happy that nothing bad happened to us. I realized that night that you shouldn't trust a stranger just because they are a bit nice to you.
Bit Bible. Read one Bible verse every time. Lock screen. Let's reviews from users and see.
My name is Isaac. I'm from Australia, and this is a scary story I'd like to tell you. One day when I was in my early teens, a friend came over for a sleepover during school holidays. We decided to do some ding-dong ditching, which is going up to houses and knocking on the door or ringing the doorbell and then running off or hiding, since that's what kids our age got up to back then. After ding-dong ditching a few houses, we came up to an old, shabby-looking house at the top of a small hill. There was a driveway leading up to the house with a gray patrol SUV out front. Of course, it was my turn to go, so I walked up and looked for the door. Keep in mind, there were a lot of bushes out front, so I had to search for the door. I went on one side in front of the car and looked, but it turned out to be the side gate, which was open. I wasn't a real bad kid, so I didn't go in at all. But right as I turned around to go back down the driveway, a red, old and sporty car pulled up and drove up the driveway and saw me. The person driving it was about 20 or so, and in the passenger seat was a girl who was about the same age. Of course, he immediately got out of his car and walked up to me and started asking what I was doing and yelling at me. I was getting scared, thinking he was going to beat me up. I looked for my friend, but I saw him running away. I told him what we were doing and that I meant no harm, and he let me off with a warning. But this isn't where the story ends. A different day, maybe about a week later, I was riding my bike down near a park when I saw the red car again. I rode right past it, so I knew they saw me too. I rode away as fast as I could, but it chased me. I eventually got to the end of the road and went onto a path that led to a big loop around the lake that would lead back to the main road. While I was riding around the loop, I looked across the lake and saw the car sitting there, waiting for me at the exit. I panicked and quickly looked in the bushes and found a path made by other bike riders, so I went down there. I ended up getting home safely and didn't tell my parents. But later that evening, things took a turn for the worse. I was sitting in my room playing video games when all of a sudden I heard the loud engine of the car as it was pulling into our driveway. I quickly ran to the front door and looked through the front gate, and I saw the driver get out of the car. It was the same person who I saw at the park, and the passenger wasn't the girl. This time it was another guy who looked about the same age as the other. I told my parents to come out, and when they saw them, my mom called the cops. There was a gate in front of the door at my house, which we were looking at them through, and they walked right up to it. To my surprise, one of the men took out a metal pipe and started hitting the gate with full force. I screamed and locked the door. After 1 minute of continuous hitting, we heard the gate fly open. The only thing left for them to break before getting in was the old wooden door, which could be opened with just a kick. Just then, we heard police sirens and people yelling. After it all died down, we came out and saw the two men being arrested, and the look he gave me sent chills down my body. We later found out that the men were on drugs, and the driver had a gun and was planning to kill me. I've never been ding-dong ditching since. This is a story about an incident that I caused when I was a reckless teenager, and because of it, I still carry a terrible trauma with me. If I hadn't acted so foolishly back then, my life would have gone smoothly. I cannot help but recall that nightmare-like incident, even if I don't want to keep reliving it. It must have been about 15 years ago. I was around 17. At that time, my routine after school was to go to the arcade with my friends. On the day of the incident, I was happily playing a game called Tekken with my friends at the arcade, but there was also a man in his 30s playing the same game. I ended up competing with him at Tekken. At that time, I was known to be very good at Tekken. There was no one in the neighborhood who could beat me. As expected, the man was completely defeated by me, and I could see him gritting his teeth in anger. He kept challenging me, and I kept winning. Then, he suddenly started to bang his fists on the monitor and roared. Then he yelled at me, "Do you want to fight me in real life instead of playing a game?" But I burst out laughing, because he was clearly a big man in his 30s, but his voice sounded like a child's. Then he suddenly grabbed me by the collar, as if he was angry at my laughter. I was flustered by his aggression, and my friends who were watching started trying to stop him. Then, the man's expression suddenly became very stern, and the sound of his voice did a 180. He said in a very deep, rumbling, low voice,
"Are you the one who made Max mad?"
I swallowed hard, confused by the sudden change in his demeanor. At that moment, I thought this man was mentally ill, and I had a gut feeling that something was wrong. I was scared because he was a big man. When I apologized, the man's eyes and expression suddenly changed to gentleness again. He let go of my collar and said, "I'm sorry, my friends are too hot-tempered. I'll stop them, so please go." Then he continued to mutter to himself, his voice changing every few seconds.
"I'm angry."
Don't be angry. I'm going to kill that guy.
"No, please don't do that."
"Let's kill him."
No, just hit him a few times.
"Should I hit him?"
No, you stay still.
I still can't forget the chill running down my as I watched the scene me. I was about to arcade when the man sounded.
"When you punk keeps crying because of let's play another round of Tekken."
When I found in surprise, the man was running towards me with tears in his eyes. I screamed, and the man threw himself at me and swung his fist. The man avoided. Stop. Someone ran. Guy. Someone called the police. Run away then. Too young. Made him hungry. Knocked him back. He fell after being he seemed for a moment. For a moment. Open and shouting in suddenly my Frank hit him and floor. Blood flowing from and froze. Suddenly, a woman. Every stop! Jail it. Then he pointed and said, manly.
We kill him. He made me mad. Just still
Something he directly. Like you were. I was and next to my. Then he shouted a deep, manly voice.
Jahao is looking for a knife right now. He's cut you. This guy in a butcher shop. You know what I mean? There are 7
For a while, the police arrived, and the man's eyes expression became, and he spoke to the police in a very kind voice. The police looked at the man and said he seemed like a good person, and asked us if he really had been violent, and they had a hard time believing it. However, due to the testimonies of men, his event, the in front of, if it was just a man. Anyway, that day, never went to the to the friend on earth, man's true. Them true.
Before we move on, he has multiple personalities. Multiple personalities make him act like those personalities. So he acting like all those personalities in one body. So yeah.
Wansee, I'm a fan of your, and I love your animated story. By the way, this incident did not happen to me, but to my grandmother. Recently, my grandma came to live with us, and since then, she has told me a lot of her numerous encounters with the paranormal. This particular encounter happened in 1974 in Anambra State, Nigeria. My grandma was in her late 40s at the time. It was a Saturday when she received a call from the local hospital. A nurse on the phone told her that her daughter, my aunt, who was pregnant, was in labor, and that her presence was needed at the hospital. It was raining out, but it seemed urgent, so my grandma began making her way there quickly. According to her, the hospital was around a 15-minute walk from her house. She was making her way there by foot, and as time went on, the rain only became more and more aggressive. The streets were empty and flooded, and there were no vehicles in sight. My grandma said she was frightened to walk through the flood since it was dangerous, but she also didn't want to abandon her daughter at the hospital. Caught in a dilemma, she stood at the side of the road, not sure of what to do. Then, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a white van came and stopped beside her. She explained that she didn't notice any cars coming, and so she was surprised to see the white van there. Inside the van, there was a man dressed in a uniform, like a security guard uniform. He asked her where she was going, and she told him she needed to be at the hospital down the road. The man told her to get in, and she did. As soon as she got to the hospital, she got out of the van, thanked the man, and began to make her way to the entrance of the hospital. Upon getting there, she met her friend who had also come earlier upon hearing that my aunt was in labor. Her friend was surprised to see her, and she asked her how she got to the hospital through the heavy rain. My grandma told her that someone was kind enough to drop her off. She turned to point toward the street where the van was supposed to be. But to her surprise, the van wasn't there. It was almost like it had vanished into thin air. The strangest part was that my grandma's friend was confused and said she hadn't seen or heard any van. The road was long and straight, so if one were to look down the road at that moment, they should have been able to catch a glimpse of the van driving down the street in the distance. But when my grandma looked, there was no van, nobody. The road was empty, and the rain was still pouring. She told me anytime she remembers this event, it sends shivers down her spine. And to this day, she doesn't know who that man was, where the van came from, or why it helped her to get to the hospital on that rainy day.
Actually, I think
If your channel is getting millions of views, got one of these, then go ahead and stop watching right now.
This incident remains a mystery to this day. Sometimes I wonder if I really experienced it or if it was just something I imagined. About 25 years ago, I went on a trip alone in my car. You might ask why I went on a trip alone, but at the time, I didn't really have anyone to travel with. The destination of my trip was in southern part of my country, which was quite far from my home, so it was a long drive. I left in the morning and arrived at my destination in the evening. It was a very small town. The sun had set, so the town was completely dark and there was not a single person in sight. I drove slowly and looked for a motel nearby. As I was driving along, I saw a small bridge ahead of me and a man sitting on a chair next to the bridge. When I suddenly noticed the man in the darkness, I got startled and stopped the car. When I rolled down the window and asked what was wrong, the man came closer, looked me up and down, and said,
Don't cross this bridge.
Then I asked him, why, in a slightly annoyed voice, wondering if he was a weirdo. Then the man said,
Don't go over this bridge. Only designated people can cross this place.
I was feeling exhausted after the long drive and shouted, Who decides that? Then the man mumbled something, but I couldn't hear him. I was troubled. What should I do? I frantically thought to myself, if I don't cross this bridge, going around would take me an extra 20 minutes. But I was tired and didn't want to drive any longer. So I shouted at him, Sorry, but I have to just go. The man stared at me for a few seconds, then went back to his chair and sat down. I eventually just went over the bridge, and the man continued to watch me with a strange expression. While I was crossing the bridge, I heard a sudden loud noise. It sounded like something huge had fallen on the car, and I felt the car shake. I was startled and stepped on the brakes. I slowly looked up at the top of the car through the window, shivering. I couldn't see anything. I was so scared to go outside that I just froze there, not knowing what to do. I looked in the rearview mirror, and the man who had been sitting there was just still staring at me. What the? I was wondering what to do, and then suddenly, at that moment, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something slowly coming down from the top of the car. It was a huge hand. A huge yellow hand. It knocked on the window. I screamed because I was so surprised. Then the hand slowly came down further and tried to open the car door. I quickly pressed the button to lock the door. Fortunately, I locked it in time and the door did not open. I saw that incredibly huge arm right in front of me, and a huge shadow covered the entire car. It was definitely an incredibly huge thing. However, I knew what it looked like. I only saw its arm. However, the arm alone was so huge that it nearly covered the entire window. I couldn't tell what it was trying to do, and it was just moving quietly, trying to open the door. My whole body was shaking like crazy. Even though I had closed all the windows, a terrible stench began to fill the car. For some reason, I felt like there was a hazy fog in front of my eyes. I started feeling like I couldn't catch my breath, and my vision was getting blurry and fuzzy. I felt the fear of death, and I had a premonition that I would die if I didn't get off the bridge quickly. I stepped hard on the accelerator. The car shot forward like a bullet, and then the thing on top started to punch the window. Then the window broke with a loud noise. I stepped harder on the accelerator, and fortunately the bridge wasn't long, so I was soon off the bridge. When I crossed the bridge and had reached the flat ground, the giant arm disappeared and the shadow covering the car also disappeared. I looked in the rearview mirror and vaguely saw a huge yellow creature crawling underneath the bridge. It was huge, but I couldn't see what it looked like. I stopped the car for a moment and got out. My legs were shaking and I couldn't breathe properly, so I ended up collapsing to the ground for a moment. Luckily, I found a motel and asked the staff about the bridge, but he said he didn't know anything. However, I saw sweat dripping down his forehead, even though it was a cool autumn day. Did he know something? I couldn't find an answer. I returned home right away the next morning. Of course, I went back using a different route, not the bridge. It's been about 25 years since that incident. Even now, I don't understand what I saw then. Was I hallucinating? But I remember that window of my car really broke, so that means it really happened. But I still have more questions that I can't answer. Why was that man sitting next to the bridge? And why did he say that to me? Who was he? Did he know something? And the more terrifying question is, what if my car door had opened, or if I hadn't gotten off the bridge at that moment, what would have happened to me?
My name is Giovanna, and I'm from Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. I had a terrifying experience that I will tell you about in this story. I was 17 when it happened, and now I'm 27. It's been 10 years, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. To make the sequence of events clearer, let me explain the layout of our apartment. It is quite small, only 35 square meters, and has one large, narrow corridor that connects all the rooms. You can hear everything from anywhere in the apartment. At the time when this happened, I was living with my parents. One morning, I was woken up by the sound of dishes being washed, and I knew it was my dad because my mom was at work. I was lying in bed, gathering the strength to get up, and as I usually always sleep with the bedroom door open, or at least ajar, I saw my dad entering the bathroom in a hurry. After a few moments, I heard him washing his hands in the bathroom, but at the same time, I still heard someone washing the dishes in the kitchen. This was confusing for me because my dad and I were alone in the apartment, and it took me a few moments to think about what I was hearing. I got up to check what was going on and who else was at home, thinking maybe it was my mom who stayed home and didn't go to work. I got to my bedroom door, from where I could see the entrance to the bathroom, and my dad washing his hands at the sink. Something seemed strange about him. He was smiling at himself in the mirror. I interrupted him by wishing him good morning and asked him what he was doing, to which he replied,
I'm washing my hands.
And the whole time, he had a strange look in his eyes and a slightly creepy smile. I thought maybe he was joking with me or something had made him laugh, but the feeling in my stomach told me that something was wrong. Then, after we made eye contact for a few moments, I asked him, "But Dad, who's washing the dishes in the kitchen?" What he said left me traumatized forever. He said, with an even bigger smile,
Also me.
At that moment, my heart nearly stopped, and I ran to the kitchen where I saw my dad washing the dishes again, and I started to cry. He wiped his hands and started questioning me about what happened. He tried to convince me that what I saw was just a dream, but I knew it was not a dream. I am convinced that it was some demon trying to impersonate my father.
I'm 19 years old, but this is a story that happened when I was on vacation 4 years ago. My 3 friends and I and all our parents decided to go to Toronto on vacation together. Once we arrived, my friends and I all hung out and had a lot of fun, and everything went as planned. But something unexpected happened on the 4th day. On that day, we all woke up and went down for breakfast. We woke up later than our parents had planned to go out to the pool. After we were done eating, we went straight to the pool. We were having fun, but around 20 minutes later, we heard the lifeguard start yelling at everybody to get out of the pool and to go to their rooms immediately. We thought he was joking, so we didn't listen, but everyone else was running for their lives. One of my friends asked the lifeguard, "What's going on?" Then he told us that he received a message from security that said the hotel killed them and was still in the building. It started running back so that when we locked the curtain. While closing, one of us was sitting outside on the walkway and told us, "Look, horrified. It was the killer, wearing a devil mask and holding a knife dripping with blood. He was about to enter another room when one of my friends made a noise, and suddenly, the man stopped what he was doing and turned to us, his eyes glaring rage. He immediately got out the window, all in us. He started to open the door, and got open. to stab me. Miss. One of them grabbed smacked the back, knocking and up, and the police later and arrested him. He turned out to be a worshiper. Criminal escaped institution. He killed people and we're happy to our parents. Been 4 years now and studying this, but sometimes have happened.
This is the story of a scary experience I had when I was 11 years old. I was an introverted girl with no friends, so I would play by myself. I have a little sister who was 6 years old at the time and was sick for some reason, which I didn't know. One night, my parents had taken her to the hospital while I stayed home alone. It was around 7 in the evening, and I was playing with my remote control car in the hallway, running after it throughout the whole house. After a while, I got tired and sat on the couch and rested my head on the back. I closed my eyes and was resting when I suddenly felt cold. I shrugged it off and figured that it was just the wind, so I just stayed still. Suddenly, I felt someone breathing heavily in my ear. I heard a whisper of something that I couldn't quite make out then. I jumped from the couch, shocked, and looked around. There was a window in the room that we often opened, so I seriously thought it was just a strong wind. But the voice that whispered and breathed heavily came in my right ear, and the window was on my left, and was completely shut. I was scared and confused, didn't understand what it was. I told my parents when they got home, and they said that I was just hallucinating and should stop watching horror movies at night. But let me tell you, this does not end here. After a few months, I was sleeping with my mom on my bed while my dad and sister were in a different bedroom. I was sleeping peacefully when the same heavy breathing started again. This time, I heard a deep voice whisper loudly into my ear, the word,
Hell.
I woke up screaming, and my mom, who had been asleep next to me, hugged me tightly. I was crying and told her about it. My parents listened and were worried, seeing me that scared. I am 20 now, and we no longer live in that house. But what I heard gave me a long-lasting fear. When I sleep, I have to cover my ear with a blanket, even when it's warm in the summer, because I don't want to hear that voice ever again.
You know you can call AI now?
I can call it and talk to it?
You can call it and talk to it, and it's free.
My story takes place in the summer of 2016 in Croatia. A rural region full of fields and not many people. I lived in a village with around 2,000 people. Their homes were scattered across miles of fields. My cousin, who lived with me at the time, and I were bored at home, and my mom thought we should go outside. So she unplugged our electronics. Without anything else to do, we were forced to go outside, even though we both didn't really want to. At the time, she was 14 and I was 12, and we got along since the age difference wasn't so big. We went on a walk down the main road, which was surrounded by fields. It was pretty fun to just hang out with my cousin. The main road had many smaller paths leading to the fields and the forest, which was further away. Those paths were made for walking and not really for driving. So me and my cousin were pretty weirded out when we saw a white car trying to drive down a path to the forest. It was going pretty slow and it wasn't far away from us, so out of pure boredom, we decided to follow it. The car stopped at some point under a tree, and two very tall men wearing sweaty t-shirts came out. There was a person in the back seat, but they didn't move at all. My cousin and I were confused, and she didn't want to go any further because she was scared they'd see us. She went back to the main road, but I was curious, so I stayed. She called my phone after 2 minutes or so and said a black vehicle was trying to go down the path too. We stayed on the call since I was getting scared because I could get trapped between the two vehicles. My only choice was to leave the path and go into the fields, but they'd be able to see me there. I was scared, and my cousin dialed 112, the European Emergency Service, and I was ready to call if something happened. I jumped into the bush in the fields because I saw the black car in the distance and I was really scared. The car passed by me after around 10 minutes, and thankfully, they didn't see me. This time, there it was, an older woman and 3 big men who got out of the vehicle. They talked for a while, and then I saw 2 of the men digging a hole into the ground in the field. At that point, I finally realized that the third person in the white car wasn't actually alive. They pushed their girl into the hole they dug and started filling the dirt back in. I wanted to vomit and I jumped out of the bush, running for my life. One of the men noticed me running and got in the black vehicle and started driving towards me. I was running for my life. She did. I made it on the road, but the black car was still following me and getting closer to me. My cousin was nowhere to be seen, running back home, which was not a idea since the car was following me on the main road. It would surely catch up to me. I tried to call the police while running, but I dropped my phone in the process, and I was too afraid to stop, and just kept running without it. I saw the car turn off the path onto the main road, and I got very scared, and started running even faster. The car sped towards me, and so I jumped into the field by the side of the road. I ran and ran and ran until I made it into the forest, which was about a mile or 2 away from the main road. I ran through the forest as I knew that my friend's house was on the other side of the forest. After around 40 minutes of running through the forest, I made it to my friend's house, and his mom called the police and my family. I found out later that my cousin started getting scared because she saw more black cars passing by, and when they saw her, they slowed down. So she ran back home and explained everything. When the police arrived around 30 minutes later, I led them to the place where they started burying the body, and there was nothing. Just a hole, no cars, no people, and no body. I never found my phone, and to this day, I wonder who those people were. What they did to that poor girl, and why they wanted to bury her body in that field.
Okay, there.
Hidden bed downstairs. But what was hiding there isn't the scary part of the story. Under the bed was my dad's 12-gauge shotgun, which he kept there in the Coco bedroom downstairs for various reasons. For context, the Coco bedroom is named after the pet bird we keep in there. The story begins with the day my friends and I decided we wanted to hang out and take a break from our jobs. I asked my dad if it would be okay if we stayed in his cabin, and he allowed it but asked that we be careful. A few days later, we headed out and eventually arrived at the cabin and brought our stuff inside. We immediately got ready to go fishing, and later on we built a campfire, played music on our guitars, told jokes, etc. We were having a great time. Eventually, it was getting late, so we decided to put out the fire and go to bed. Our friend group was 2 guys, including myself, and 3 girls. And to keep everyone's name private, let's call the other guy A and the girls B, C, and D. A and I slept in the Coco room, and the girls slept in the other bedroom upstairs. While I was sleeping, A woke me up and said that he heard someone talking outside. I told him that he was just tired, and that maybe it was just an animal scavenging food we left outside by the campfire. But as I was telling him this, I heard the doorknob on the front door of the cabin start shaking loudly. I got goosebumps up my arms, and I looked at A, and he was breathing heavily. I got out my dad's 12-gauge shotgun from under the bed and loaded it and cocked it. A looked at me and said, "Are you going to shoot them?" I replied, "If they're going to hurt us, I might have to." Then I told A to get the large knife from the kitchen, and we walked up to the front door. Just as we were about to open it, the front door swung open, and there were 2 skinny men standing there. One of them was older, probably in his 50s, wearing a plain black shirt, and was holding some kind of homemade knife, and the other guy was younger, possibly in his 20s. I couldn't see him completely because he was standing behind the older guy, but I could tell that he was holding some kind of a big weapon. As soon as I saw them, I backed up and pointed the gun at the 2 guys, and A also pointed the knife at them. We sat there, frozen, without saying a single word for what felt like a whole minute. So I spoke and told them, "F off or I will blow your heads off." They both panicked and ran into the woods. After we confirmed that they were really gone, A and I gasped for air as if we hadn't breathed for a long time. I told A to go check on the girls and decided to go outside, still holding my dad's 12-gauge to check around the cabin. I then went inside and told A that I didn't see anything, and he said that the girls were still asleep. A little shocked, I said, Wow, after all that commotion, they're still sleeping? A and I decided to tell the girls what happened when they woke up in the morning. Maybe because of the adrenaline and maybe because of the fear, A and I didn't sleep a wink that night. When the girls woke up, we told them what happened, and naturally, they were shocked and scared. We decided to cut our stay at the cabin short and go home that day. When we got home, I told my dad what happened and he scolded me for not calling the police. But he was also glad that we all came back alive and well. My dad then called his friend who was a cop and reported what happened. My dad told me to call A and to come to our house so he could also give a statement about the two men in the incident. It's been 2 years since that incident now. My friend and I still hang out once in a while, but A and I will never forget that incident. One day when we were hanging out, A said to me, "What do you think would happen if your dad's 12 gauge hadn't been there?" And to this day, I am afraid to imagine the answer.
Do not play this game unless you like diving off of cliffs, surfing with
It was the middle of the summer. My parents had left for the weekend to go to our house in Cape Cod. It's about a 2-hour drive away, so it's no big deal for them to leave me alone for a few days. My mom had made some pulled pasta for me to heat up, to eat whenever, and I had some money if I wanted to order pizza. Things were all good. The first night I was alone, I stayed up till about 3 in the morning playing Xbox, so I woke up really late the next day. I checked my phone, and when I woke up, I saw it was a little past 1. I had made plans to play some street hockey with 3 of my friends, so I threw myself out of the bed and I stumbled into the shower. I take really long showers, so when my parents are gone, I go crazy. I was in there for about 45 minutes on my phone, scrolling through Reddit and Twitter. I mean, Twitter. So then I heard my front door open out of nowhere. The bathroom is directly up the stairs from the back door. And the thing is, it's pretty loud when it opens and closes. I immediately froze since, obviously, I was supposed to be alone. I waited for about 2 minutes. My ears trained in, trying to hear anything. I heard nothing. I figured it was just the wind or maybe my parents were home early. So I turned off the shower, wrapped my towel around myself, and slowly walked down the stairs to check it out. So the stairs to the kitchen are pretty tight and walled in. So it's essentially like walking down a tighter version of a regular stairwell. So I can't see into the kitchen when I walk down. Even though my house is old as shit, and each step on the stairs makes a super loud creak, I still took my time and tried to be as quiet as possible. I probably took about 45 seconds walking down all 12 stairs. So when I get to the second to the last stairs, I take a little breather and compose myself. In my mind, I knew I was being stupid. There obviously wasn't anything in the kitchen. There's no way I wouldn't have heard another noise. And there's no reason for them to still be in the kitchen, even if there were burglars or something in my house. After sort of mentally chastising myself for being such a wuss, I sort of chuckled to myself for being so stupid and just normally walked the last 2 stairs. And I turned the corner into the kitchen. Standing about 2 feet away from me, in the middle of my kitchen, is a man staring straight at me, perfectly still, with a massive smile on his face, just staring at me. The thing I remember most vividly wasn't his face or his smile, but his arms. They weren't just at his side. He held them in the strangest, most abnormal position I've ever seen. They were where one would normally hold their arms, but he had rotated them to the point where they were almost completely reversed, as well as lifting them up behind himself. I don't know why I remember this so much, but it's just the most demonic, abnormal position I've ever seen. Honest to God, I think I almost had a heart attack right there. Looking back, I can realize how creepy this situation was, but in the moment, I just took a step toward him and punched him as hard as I could in the jaw, sort of half slapping / pushing him towards the ground. The second I connected, I beelined up the stairs, dropping my towel in the kitchen with my heart beating out of control, running up the stairs naked as hell. I fucking sprinted into my room and locked the door behind me. I quickly put a chair up against the doorknob, like you see on TV. Almost without thinking, I immediately called 911. Nearly in tears, I told the operator what happened. As I sat on the floor of my room, practically in the fetal position, staring at the door, praying that the cop would be here soon, I noticed a light coming from the gap between my door. It had stopped. This dude was standing outside of my bedroom door. There's no words to describe the feeling I had. I was paralyzed with fear, watching the shadows across the bottom of the door shift in tiny ways. I stayed balled up, staring at the gap, naked, praying the man would go away for what seemed like an hour. All the while, the 911 operator was asking, "Hello, sir? Are you there? Hello?" I didn't want to make a noise. And even if I wanted to move my arms to bring the phone to my mouth, I don't think I could have. Eventually, the light returned to the gap, and I heard the faintest of footsteps in the wooden floorboards as he walked down the hall. It was silent for minutes, as I just sat there curled up, unable to even speak, naked. I heard banging on the front door and the sound of 2 officers entering my house. I finally felt safe and opened the door to 2 of them standing there, and I jumped on them and wrapped my legs around them. I almost cried. I was naked. Nowadays, my parents don't even leave me home alone. Thank God. And I check every lock on the house before going to bed. I still get nightmares occasionally, and my heart starts racing whenever I see someone standing still. But I'm doing all right. Even working with sketch artists and a few lineups, the police never found whoever this guy was in my house. That sends shivers down my spine every time I look outside, half expecting to see him standing across the street smiling under a lamppost. I have no idea what he wanted or who he was, but regardless, that was the scariest night of my life.
A truly terrifying incident happened late one summer night, almost a decade ago, and it still gives me shivers whenever I think about it. I used to live with my maternal grandfather in a 2-story house with my very loving extended family for work-related reasons. During that time, I enjoyed staying up late watching TV, and so I usually slept in the room that had the TV. He was in a room which was the only room up there, along with a small bathroom. The room had 2 wooden beds, a fan, and a television. It also had 4 windows covered with curtains that overlooked the terrace and the railing. The only entrance to the room was a wooden door with see-through mesh on the top half. The staircase leading downstairs was outside the room, just a few steps past the doorway. My uncle used to lock the door at the bottom of the stairs from the other side to keep any potential robbers out. One night, after finishing my TV time, I locked the room's door, closed the curtains, and went to sleep. I was fast asleep when suddenly I woke up to the sound of knocking at the door. At first, I thought it might be one of my uncles or cousins. I checked the time, and it was around 2:30 in the morning. I decided to check who was at the door, and what I witnessed still terrifies me to this day. I got up and walked over, and through the see-through part of the door, I saw a young boy, around 5 or 6 years old, dressed in dirty and dark clothes. I couldn't see his face because he turned away as soon as I got up. Before I could process what's happening, he ran towards the stairs and abruptly jumped off, disappearing in an instant. It wasn't a human being. After realizing what I had just witnessed, fear overwhelmed me and I began crying. I was too scared to do anything else, so I quickly ran back to bed and started reciting prayers. My uncles came to check on me. I was trembling and had a very high fever. I told him what had happened, but nobody believed me. They tried to convince me that it was all in my head, but even now, I still believe that what I saw was real. After that day, I started sleeping downstairs, and eventually, I moved out of the house altogether.
What?
This is an incident that happened on a rainy day when I was in 3rd grade. At the time, and in general when I was a kid, I didn't really believe in ghosts and such. On that rainy day, I had just gotten home from school, and I decided to finish all my assignments before I watched TV and played on my Nintendo DS. After I finished all my assignments, I took a peek into the kitchen to see whether my mom was home yet.
"Ma, can you turn on the TV?"
I asked when I saw her cooking dinner. She replied to the living room TV for me. Then she went back and continued preparing. I played on my Nintendo while the TV was on in the background. I was having fun playing Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, when suddenly I saw a tall dark in my peripheral vision. I focused on the game until I noticed that the figure was slowly walking towards me. I stopped playing, but I didn't move my head from its position so it wouldn't be obvious that I was looking. It was wearing a long-sleeved shirt and black pants. I wasn't scared until I saw parts of its body. The figure was heavy. What I saw sent a shiver down my spine. I was so scared that I couldn't move. My mind wasn't working. What do I do? I asked myself repeatedly. I wanted to shout, but my mouth felt like it was glued shut. The moment I turned my head to face the figure is a moment I will never forget. The figure was bent and contorted and walking strangely, and the image of it is burned into my memory. I closed my eyes and prayed that the figure would go away. Fortunately, when I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. I ran to my mom, crying. She asked me, "What happened?" Then I told her about the terrifying figure that I had seen. Looking at her expression, my mom didn't seem so surprised. "The figure that you saw was one of our ancestors. Maybe he just wanted to visit the house," she said. Still shaken up by what I'd seen, I asked, "Why doesn't he have a head?" "You're too young to know the whole story," she replied.
And is so cover this up that they're blaming Americans for getting caught hiding that 6,000.
My name is Ami. This incident happened to me when I was in college. I was 20 years old, living alone in my college housing. It was just another ordinary day for me. I had just finished my classes and decided to stop by the nearest grocery store to pick up a few things before heading home. As I walked through the aisles, I noticed a man with bloodshot eyes and torn clothes staring at me from a distance. His eerie smile gave me chills, and I could feel his gaze following me around the store. I tried to brush it off and grabbed what I needed before making my way to the checkout. As I stood in line, I could feel his presence getting closer and closer. It was then that he leaned in close to me and whispered something in my ear that I couldn't quite make out. Feeling uneasy, I hurriedly paid for my items and rushed to my car in the parking lot. As I was in, I heard footsteps behind me and turned around to see the man charging towards me with his hand. I managed to dodge his attack and into my car. The doors behind me, pounded on the window, and screamed obscenities as I frantically start the car and escape. It felt like an eternity. I finally managed to get away and called the police as soon as I was a safe distance away. The police searched the area, but they couldn't find the man. I was terrified and couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there somewhere, watching me. Days went by, and I tried my best to move on, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, a thunderstorm rolled in. The rain pounded against my window, and every time there was a bolt of lightning, it illuminated my room like daylight. I woke up at around 5 or 6 a.m., startled by a particularly loud thunderclap that shook the entire house. As I tried to calm myself down and to go back to sleep, I noticed a strange shadow on the wall. It was in the shape of a human, but something about it seemed off. As the lightning flashed again, I saw the silhouette of a man standing outside my window, his face pressed up against the glass, watching me. My heart leapt into my throat, and I froze in terror. Suddenly, I saw him. The man from the store was standing outside, holding his knife, staring at me. Same smile. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream, as he disappeared with each subsequent bolt of lightning. I knew I had to do something, so I bolted out of bed and ran to the front door to make sure it was locked. But it was too late. As I turned around, I saw the man standing in my living room, his twisted grin wider as he pointed his knife at me. I was trapped, cornered, with nowhere to go. The crazy man then charged at me, shouting, "You are mine! You are mine! You are mine!" I fell to the ground, paralyzed by fear, and then he got on top of me and whispered in my ear calmly, "I got you." He then started laughing maniacally. He started cutting my clothes off with his knife. I couldn't move. His strength overpowered me. Just when I thought it was all over, I heard a loud thud and saw the man fall to the ground. I then saw my neighbor on top of the man. He then held the man until he went unconscious. After the man unconscious on the floor, a leaf washed over my body. I knew I was in years and attempted assault, ordeal, trauma. Couldn't feeling of watch months later of nightmare night, man who all my life and even a might have had my neighbor grown up at
once arcade years ago. If I could words how what I would use a day never went. I used to arcade maybe once every years. I don't exactly watch arcade the day it happened. I think there was a new game that I wanted. I headed straight to the arcade. Wrapup played very and was myself. Eventually, I got up and grabbed a corner to rest. While I was, a man walked up, stood still. My view looked at me, but he over the stomach the moment I saw his. He asked, "Want to buy a doll?" I asked what kind of doll it was. I looked around. On it was a pig thing like on it. No, the head. I got. It looked that I felt, but of course, thought these were not real. To me, you're interested in buying. Send me a message. He gave me a business card that had an address on it. Written on the card, balls. I palm on the outside. Balls aren't really. Leave around him. Grabbed my. I kept talking. Why don't you come to my? If you actually, I'm sure one. Didn't mimic. Dragging brass. Just walked away. He watched me, and then building back to play. I think I don't. It was past. Hard. Decided out of the go home. As I saw Katie look at the park and were noticed, but I he said some words that here and they turned me. Their murder was burned through me, and the twisting feeling in my stomach came back in full force. I to see them quickly into my car, but then I heard. Wanted to play off its big. All started laughing when I down in surprise, staring at me over, standing, going towards me. Guys around slowly walked me around and saw them pulling syringes out of their jacket pockets. My heart sank. Towards my car. They started towards me, clanked out. Then started coming. Men were wearing aprons, worn by bullets. I ran like crazy at that point to get in the car. I got in and immediately turned it on and stepped on the gas. As I left the parking lot, they stopped chasing me. I watched them in my rearview mirror. Some of the men went to the van and took a cooler out of the trunk. I was still scared, but I was curious to know what they were doing. So I parked the car about a block away and watched them with binoculars I kept in the car from when I go hiking. After a while, they met another man and gave him the cooler, and the man gave them a black bag. Then they took a bunch of cash out of the black bag and divided it amongst themselves. It definitely seemed like something illicit was going on, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it since I was still freaked out from how they all approached me. After that, I just headed home and tried not to think too hard about it. From that day on, I never went near that arcade again, and thankfully I never saw those men again. But since that day, I've occasionally wondered about the truth of what I saw and experienced that day. Was the photo the man showed me real? What was in that cooler? And what I've wondered most is, what on earth would they have done to me if I hadn't gotten away? Hello, my name is Angie. I am from Albania, and this is a story from when I was 11 or 12 years old. It was summertime, and my family and I were staying at my grandparents' house for the weekend. It also happened that my aunt and her kids would be staying there for the weekend too. One night at around 10 p.m., my cousins and I decided to play hide and seek. It didn't take long to find everyone, except for my cousin Edith. For context, behind my grandparents' house on either side is a tall wall. No one is supposed to be able to enter the yard from back there. The only way in is from the front of the house. My grandparents live in a rural area, and criminal activities are often reported to take place there. And even though the walls were there, as kids, we were still scared to go too far back there. We were all working together to find Edith. When I saw a hand in the bushes at the back of the house and I thought it was Edith, I did find it quite a bit odd because the hand seemed to be rather big and all my cousins were around my age, but I didn't really question it. When I saw the hand, I screamed, "I know where Edith is!" I was quite proud of myself for finding her, but just a moment later, I heard Edith get up and yell, "You found me!" She was actually hiding in a bush around the front of the house. I was terrified because everyone was in front of the house at that moment. We all were scared to go to the back, so I couldn't help but to think, who was that back there? But I didn't say anything to anyone about what I saw. After that game, our grandma called us to come inside since it was very dark. Edith and another cousin, Sarah, and I slept together on a mattress on the floor, with a window right above us. Just like everyone, we stayed up late talking. I did tell them about what I saw, but they told me I was lying and just continued on with the girl talk. I got tired at around 1 a.m. and so did my cousins. As I was falling asleep, I heard some unexpected footsteps outside the house. I tried to ignore them, but they didn't stop and were getting louder. When I got fed up with the noises, I got up and looked out the window, expecting it to be my cousins pranking us. But what I saw were two unfamiliar men. When I made eye contact with them and realized what was happening, I screamed at the top of my lungs as loud as I could. The men ran away and everyone in the house woke up. I started crying and explained what happened to my mother, but she just told me I probably had a nightmare. I was so frustrated that no one believed me. As a teenager, I forgot that this all happened until almost 10 years later when I was at a family reunion at my grandparents' house. Being there brought back those memories, and while talking with my grandfather, I jokingly mentioned the scary things I saw that night. Then my grandfather told me the truth behind it all. Apparently, at the time of the incident, my grandfather was involved in some illegal activities and some people were after him, but no one in the family knew. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up.
Just downloaded a new one this week. It was pretty cool. It's called Bit Bible. It forces me to read the Bible every time I open my phone, one verse at a time. So
it all happened one summer on what could have been just a normal night. My brother's two friends were sleeping over, so my mom and I decided to get a pizza to make it easy to feed everyone. My mom and I decided to get the pizza from a popular pizza chain in Arizona called Fired Pie. We all decided that we would take the pizza to go and eat it at home. And we brought my brother's friends and our dog, a husky named Frosty, with us to pick up the pizza. The reason we didn't leave Frosty at the house was that he was still young and very destructive when left alone. But it turned out that bringing Frosty with us meant more than just not having to buy new blinds or shoes. When we arrived at Fired Pie, I didn't want to get out of the car because I was feeling very lazy, but my mom and my brother didn't want to leave me alone in the car. But since Frosty couldn't go inside the restaurant anyway, he stayed in the car with me and I convinced them that I would be fine. The place where we parked was very dark, and I was in the back seat with Frosty, partially almost lying down and scrolling on my phone. Suddenly, Frosty started to whine and then barked a few times. At first, I thought he was being paranoid because he was little and felt trapped in the car. I just patted him on the back and that calmed him down a little. But then he started to bark aggressively at me and I was taken aback. I shifted over to pet Frosty again when the reflection of my phone in the side view mirror caught my eyes. As I looked over at the mirror, I saw something terrifying. In the reflection, I could see a man wearing a black hoodie and ski mask staring right at me. I screamed and turned around and saw that man was trying to open the door. Thankfully, it was locked. He then screamed, "Open up the door!" I was so scared. I was only 14 at that time and didn't know how to react or do. He stepped on me, looking at. I came back to. I didn't do something bad would happen. Up some courage and the cop everything cool. He left and I didn't see anyone around. So I got out of the car with my dog and started running towards the restaurant. But as I was running, someone grabbed me and I tried to scream, but my mouth was covered by a cloth. The last thing I saw was my dog running to the restaurant, and then I in a hospital. I felt like I'd found. Looked around my mother, very concerned. I then asked them what had happened. They told me waiters at the door, and my mom and Frosty scared. They ran all that I was in the car. Frosty said Bart looked all blood found the man attacked around with a knife. I only was looking for more. When I saw a knife, immediately attacked anger. Bring to make his arm a knife. Meanwhile, would have happened until now. Most hear the story.
Good thing.
Waitress,
Yeah.
1991, part-time. I was associated business. Friends about it. Except hour. Every day with me. Yeah, I was working night and I see a couple restaurant them down. They all said the girl from me. She grabbed me, taking me. Just shift near the end. The girl again. It must have been the night to her, and she took the fork again from me. Also squeezed my. It was well, she off her fork. I picked it, squeezed my times, but it felt tighter each. Not intentionally. Something had to have been wrong, but it was hard to tell at that very moment. Not too much later, they eventually finished their meals and all three of them had left the restaurant. I went over to their table to clean it, and as I picked up the plate, I saw that there was a napkin under the plate, and it had words on it, and it said, "Help me, call the police." My mind was now racing with dark thoughts. Was this girl kidnapped? Was she trying to escape her captors? Who were those people that she was with? It was so hard to process what was going on. The whole week I thought about this girl. I felt so bad for not realizing the situation she was actually in. It kept hitting me like a bullet. The more I thought about her, I made a very disturbing resemblance. That girl, she looked so familiar. That's when I connected the dots. I recognized this girl to be a missing person for years now. It had to be none other than Antoinette Cadito. Her whole face and body physique matched her description. Every night before I go to bed, I always remember that encounter. I kept feeling like I was the worst person in the world. I should have picked up on her hints that she was in trouble. I could have ended her suffering of being kidnapped. I could have helped return her to her loved ones. Antoinette's mother, Penny, had died in 1999 due to cardiac and liver issues. Now that I think about this case more, I strongly believe that her mother had something to do with her disappearance. She had to have sold her daughter. Every interview, she didn't look concerned with her daughter being abducted and held against her will. I feel sick to my stomach every time I think about this. It is still unknown where Antoinette is as of today. This mystery has never been solved. Although law enforcement officials and I believe she is deceased, she is still listed as a missing person. I just really hope that wherever Antoinette is today, that she has found peace, and I hope that she is no longer living a life of pain.
This is not my story, it's my father's. Back in the 90s, my father was studying at a university in Calcutta while my grandparents lived in another state. The apartment he lived in was on the 4th floor with a balcony separated from the living room by a door. The balcony provided both light and a cool breeze, so my dad would often leave the door to the balcony open and sit on the sofa while he was doing his work. The day the incident occurred, there was a blackout in the area caused by a storm. It was late when it happened, so the apartment was cast into pitch blackness. While the summers were cooler back in the day, it was still pretty hot. So Dad decided to leave the balcony door and windows in his bedroom open to circulate cool air. He usually closed the door and shut the windows every night before bed, but he decided to make that night an exception. He woke up sometime in the middle of the night, sweating. His instincts told him that something was off, so he tried to figure out what woke him up. Suddenly, the urge to answer nature's call hit him, and with a pit in his stomach, he left the room. The washroom was kind of far away from his room. It was on the other end of the apartment, and he'd have to pass by the living room to get there. As he was walking past the sofa, he looked over and froze. The balcony door was open, and a cool breeze was hitting him as he had hoped. What he had not hoped for was to see people sitting on his sofa. Well, maybe not people, but things. There were around 3 to 4 figures sitting on his sofa. He could not make out what they looked like. They seemed to be blending in and out of the shadows, changing shape. What scared him more was that he could tell they were all looking at him. They didn't have eyes, but he could feel their. He contemplated running back, but his bladder was strongly against that idea. Cursing, he shut his eyes tightly, ran to the washroom, did his business, and ran back, feeling the stares on him again as he ran past the sofa. He locked the door of his room, got in bed, and tried his best to go to sleep. When he woke up, it was morning and the skies were clear. He shakily went to the living room, but saw nothing out of place. The balcony door was still open, letting bright light flood into the room. He never told my grandparents about his experiences, as he didn't want to make them worry. The only people close to him who know about this are my mom and me. You might think that he left the apartment soon after this happened, but he stayed there until he completed his undergraduate degree and never had a repeat of that experience. He did, however, always close the balcony door at night from then on, with no exceptions. During his stay in the apartment after the event, he did some research into the history of the building, but came up with nothing. The building had not been built on burial grounds. There weren't any records of murder, suicides, or fatal accidents. This eventually made him chalk up the incident to a bad dream or some sort of hallucination. But I sometimes wonder if the things he saw weren't just a figment of imagination. What if they were real? Hello, Wansee. My name is Kai, and I'm currently living in the Philippines. The incident I'm about to recount occurred 5 years ago, but it continues to haunt me to this day. It all began when I left on a 5-day trip to Bicol with my boyfriend and 5 friends. The first 3 days were fantastic as we explored various islands, visited tourist spots, savored chili ice cream, and even rode ATVs to see Mount Mayan. On the 4th night, we visited at one of our friends' abandoned houses. The place seemed unthreatening except for the cockroaches that scurried about when our friends were on the light. The house was covered in being decided to rain friend. I opted to think while the friends sleep having time in conversation was Was that all of all even as from me and after seconds leave the night were about to act were we on air nation how right one of us even just think to brush it off go to sleep. I like fast as simply sleep that what it no to wake up day myself my boyfriend felt a back around man past 30s at me paralyzed I couldn't like get me hair I lost woke up then my boyfriend me gently here ready or missed the bus and I shared to me I'm friend shop they all hearing a man's laugh the night they said that was so felt as if it was in the room as happened still lecture cycle come I went to a yeah. Time it was a frequented by two never woke up at 5 a.m. For 3 each our bracket routine was the same collect remind due dates send it over collected hated most of the all sweet paperwork causing me late writing calculated and Joel hides the button to your face you often by headline day I had to date again because your had gone out leaving as usual I hate every time he did he finally returned and work he handed me the money I needed to bring to the main office it was already 9 p.m. I cursed under my breath as I started the long drive home while driving along the pitch-dark winding road my headlights suddenly flickered ah crap not now I muttered I stopped for a moment tapping the headlight and thankfully it stopped flickering I continued driving but as I navigated the dark road I felt something swoop overhead I looked up but didn't see anything just before I reached a sharp bend something swooped down again hitting my helmet and knocking me off and at the same time my headlight I crashed the road the so thick I hardly see a thing I stood up myself off and sitting behind a tree I waited for my eyes to adjust to the night thanks to the moonlight I was able to see the cycle or I could move towards it a large bird it the bird was massive about as big as me it hopped around my motor I noticed my helmet crashed I stayed hidden behind trying to make sense of seeing what kind of bird grows big and flies it wasn't like any bird I'd ever seen it had a head like a turkey and its feathers were the knife as it helmet jaw dropped up to my helmet not feet or beak but with what appeared to be that came out of wing in terror picked up my helmet to drop it when it heard a car approaching bird flew away just before the by the opportunity to ride a motorcycle, I started relieved it worked again. Away, leaving my helmet behind. And I kept looking around, scared the bird would swoop down on me again. When I reached the main office, I handed over the money to the manager, who was standing outside the dormitories. He asked why I looked so dirty, and why I wasn't wearing my... I lied and told him it fell off. Before heading home, I spoke with him, requesting that he which I was assigned to make sure the cashier finished his work on time. I couldn't going home late every night. Thankfully, the manager agreed, and from there on out, I was able to leave at 5 p.m., avoiding any more late-night drives. Even so, I knew that I needed to get out of this job, but I hoped nothing would happen before I could finally escape.
Okay, back.
I have been watching a lot of your videos over the past few years, and I would love to share my story. My name is Raquel, and this happened to me several years ago when I was working in a call center. This incident took place in February 2016 at 3 in the morning. It was the week, and I decided to I quit as I had my phone in my locker. After it, my wallet to go back. Travel takes an hour. I was able to at the office 30 to 40 minutes. Phone and quickly, since I wanted to get quickly, I decided to take or taxi. After a while, cab in front of me. Inside was so, but I didn't much of it. We take when riding, but the taxi was for a few minutes, and I was just in the window. I noticed it started down Sig River. I looked at the driver. It was short. He stopped at me. Hold up. Couldn't immediately shouting and cursing at me while pointing the gun. I slowly took my phone out and gave it to him. He snapped and turned it off. I really didn't know. Wallet. Slowly, my wallet. He tried it, but because I had my wallet. My head completely back me and tried to get drive. Turn, try to inside. Thankfully, work. The car out and screaming and look fast as I then and yelled and the police and nearest the police that the road in stolen that and the real driver. The suspect strategy was taxi, stealing, pretending to be a driver. After police report stopped going away for media, I stopped riding in for a couple of months, looking for a closer to my 2016 friend. Previous police contacted me. The whole was checked the. I was asked me to go to the police to give my. I said wrongly. It was evidence that I was able to. It was still from the incident. Didn't go out. Didn't. And we said, tell her back that the not robbed me. That situation was more using strategy. Targeting work complete. I am now working home. I hope those who are still working will take caution when taking. 20 went on a camp with my friend. At the time, I was years old. The camp we arrived in the evening. We had a fishing and grill. I went to an after week, but I was in the middle of the night. I needed a tent and my eyes were drawn up to the bright moonlight. Walked over to the tree line and relieved myself, looking around to make sure nothing was nearby. As I was zipping up my pants, I saw a large, dark silhouette moving in the forest. I thought for a moment that it was a bear, and I was gripped by fear. When I looked closely, it slowly became more visible in the darkness. It looked like a human figure, but it was incredibly big. He slowly approached me. When he came out of the forest and was illuminated by the moonlight, I could make out his appearance. He was at least twice my size and had a huge angular face like a primitive man. He was covered in fur and not wearing any clothes. More noticeable than anything else was that he was making a strange sound that I had never heard before. It was like a sharp sound made by strongly scraping his vocal cords. Every time I heard it, I felt goosebumps race across my whole body. His face was clearly a human face, and although it was hard to see because it was covered in fur, it looked like he was smiling. In his hands, he was holding large rocks. They were massive, around the size of basketballs. He was holding each of the enormous rocks with one hand. He didn't look to be straining at all, like they weren't heavy at all to him. He approached me slowly. I asked him who he was and what he needed, but he didn't seem to understand me. He seemed to be mumbling something, but it didn't sound like language. I felt an inexplicable sense of despair and fear rising from my stomach. The instant I looked into his eyes, my whole body became paralyzed. Before I could even think of anything, every cell in my body was overcome by fear. I had enough time to run to the tent, but my body wouldn't move. Looking back now, I think I already instinctively knew at that moment that there was nothing I could do. His physical ability was several times greater than mine, so even if I ran, he could catch up to me in a matter of seconds. And I knew that if I ran, I would provoke him even more, so there was nothing I could do. He was finally close enough to touch me. He looked at me curiously and felt the flesh on my arm. And then he pressed hard on my stomach with the back of his hand. It seemed as if he wanted to know what was inside my stomach. I pushed his hand away with everything in me, but he didn't move. He was like a statue. Meanwhile, Christian seemed to be sleeping soundly in the tent. Funnily enough, at that moment, I felt that even if I got eaten by that monster, I wanted Christian to survive. I wasn't a coward, I was a normal adult male, but I felt so small in front of that huge man. The creature in front of me didn't have the feel of a human. Standing before him was like being in front of a bear or a lion. I kept asking him what he wanted, but he didn't respond. Then after a while, he frowned and circled around me. He was still holding the rocks in his hands. I couldn't take my eyes off him for a second because I was afraid that he would hit me with the rock. Of course, I also simulated it countless times in my head. I imagined launching a surprise attack on him while he looked away from me. However, I had a gut feeling that he wouldn't budge even if I punched him. That's how big and strong he was. He circled around me once more and then slowly started to move away. And finally, seemed to lose interest in me. My head was dizzy as I watched him move away. I guess I was so scared that I couldn't breathe properly. He suddenly started running incredibly fast and disappeared into the forest. As I had intuited, his motor skills were several times greater than a human's, and his running speed was so fast that my eyes could barely keep up. I walked over to Christian's tent and woke him up. I told him what happened to me, but he seemed incredulous. But when he smelled that horrible stench coming from me and saw that I was drenched in sweat, he understood that something had really happened. We quickly packed up and drove away. I still don't know what the human or creature I saw that day was. What did he want from me? Was he trying to eat me? The answers to many of my questions remain unanswered, and I have never gone camping again since that day.
Unfortunately, or I should say, fortunately, this story is short. It was about 4 years ago. I'll keep the location vague for the sake of anonymity, but I will say it was in the northern half of Louisiana. I've lived here pretty much my whole life, and the few things I've ever experienced before this were at my father's house in Texas when I was younger, but that can be its own story. Anyway, I lived in an apartment complex about 30 to 40 minutes from where I worked. I was part of the evening shift at my job at the time. I would have to drive down a long, mostly empty road, heading towards my home. This would last about 10 minutes before I had to head down a smaller, more rural suburban area.
Okay.
This is where it happened. It was probably a little past 11 or maybe even midnight, the usual time I got off for where I used to work. I was probably a little past 11 or maybe even midnight.
Drenched in sweat, he understood that something had really...
Complex about 32 minutes from where I worked. Part of the evening shift at my job at the time. I would have to drive down a long, mostly empty road, heading towards my home. This would last about 10 minutes before I had to head down a smaller, more rural suburban area. This is where it happened. It was probably a little past 11 or maybe even midnight, the usual time I got off for where I used to work.
What actually happened is I played
I was just
Wrapup.
driving, listening to either music or a podcast. I don't remember which. I was just really tired from work. I was relaxing and driving when my headlights illuminated something off to my right, in the ditch along the road. I only saw it for a few seconds, but I swear this pale creature, probably about 6 feet long, if not more, was sprawled out on the ground, crawling up out of the ditch, flat on its stomach. I only caught a glimpse, but I sometimes remember it having 6 limbs, other times 4. As I said, I was trying to pay more attention to the road, not expecting something like this. Either way, it startled me. I remember vividly seeing movement as I passed by, like it had crawled out of the drainage pipe and was about to head into the yard of the house I was passing. One of its long, thin, and lanky limbs reached up to place its right hand to pull itself up further. I passed it fast and did a double take, questioning what I'd seen. My mind was wondering if what I saw was real, or was I just tired, my mind playing tricks on me? Either way, I was not dumb enough to think about turning around to check it out. All the way back home, I kept driving and told myself it was just the weird way my headlights were making shadows on the rocks in the ditch. I even tried to recreate this effect for days, trying multiple ideas to recreate that effect, but never once did. Never did the shadows ever look the same as what I'd seen that night. Even trying to look out of the corner of my eyes, nothing. I asked my coworkers the following days if anything like what I described, but to my dismay, they brushed it off.
It's a new
joking
anime,
and asking, "Did you
and
I wish I saw, but I didn't. But on glad, it keep telling me it had nothing with
It's a
anything
right.
imagination. No, all part of size. Its description of what I saw. Things I've heard of about crawlers. Heck, I even started to follow behind the talkings like. I've told about this. Most should still have more headlights, but you can be sure if it really is there, please never see you again.
Millions of
hey, Rob. Bit come back.
I'm a 12 to it, but it take me in 9th grade when
Back
something
on.
strange happened at our school. A normal day nowhere. Senior classroom was down, first in the classroom, screaming faces. Terrified, a teacher who had also been a teacher, one of their classmates had choked them in the classroom. Teacher had no time to investigate. They heard the washroom to find the accused girl somehow to get back to her class. Was the complete mess. Books and littered everywhere. The other students were forced to leave, frightened and confused. Not go back and that's where things really weird. All happening, sitting in my classroom with my class being weird. But curiosity got the. I didn't resist out to this happening in his class. Little did we were witness something truly disturbing. Arrived, discovered that the girl had hid herself inside her class, refused to open. Worried about being there, they reached out to her, who was alarming. Her daughter had been dealing with mental health issues. She'd come and take her to the stretch, turn all. Finally, after what felt like ages, the teachers managed to door open as the bit loose, doing a sent down on her lines. She's tomming on the ground. Here's the been top tower, not heavy that Earth, and it's just all by herself. Arrived, the girl remained not a single word. They quickly took her to the hospital, where it was discovered that brain disease caused hallucination and erratic. It was a shocking revelation that some bizarre events we even to this I can't forget. I still a seemingly girl could possess strange strength and perform such a chilling act. It serves as a reminder that there are depths to the human mind that we may never fully understand, and horrors that can emerge from within. And with this incident, I owe a debt of gratitude to my friend that day. You see, I had a strange urge to use the washroom and asked my friend to come along for a quick chat, but she insisted we wait until the next period. Little did I know that her decision may have saved me from crossing paths with that troubled girl. It sends shivers down my spine when I imagine what might have happened.
I've been working as a police officer for more than 15 years in San Diego, California. More specifically, I was a police canine holder. There were some moments on the job where it was rough, but one moment made me see how excruciating the job really is. On March 3rd, 2022 at approximately 12:38 p.m., San Diego Police Department, which I was working at, received a request for urgent cover from the Sheriff's Department at a residence that was not too far from where we were. The request was that there was a woman who had been given paperwork because she had quite a bit of eviction notices. When the deputies tried to talk with the woman and tried to give her the paperwork, they saw a big knife in her hand. She wasn't listening, and she slammed her front door and shut it, and she barricaded it. That's when me, along with the other police officers, were called for backup. When we got to the given address, I, along with the K-9 unit, were told to wait outside of the lobby in case we were needed, which we were later called to enter the unit as an additional less lethal option. We got to the area, and one of the deputies broke down the door. I and some other officers walked through the door, and we went inside of the apartment. We were all calling for her to come out with her hands up, but she wouldn't listen. We were able to see the woman in the room with an open door, and one deputy officer named Jason. He kept shooting warning shots to the wall for her to obey and not to do this the hard way. Right in an instant, we saw the woman charging at us with a knife. We were backing up and out into the hallway, and Jason kept trying to shoot her, but he kept missing. When this didn't work, the woman swung the knife at us, which happened to land on my chest for a second or two, and then it was taken out. This prompted one of the other officers to shoot the woman. She was struck at least once and she immediately was killed on the scene. I could barely move now. I was in so much pain. I screamed out that I got stabbed, but it seemed like no one acknowledged it. 5 seconds later, as if anyone was hurt, and that I got stabbed once again. Immediately rushed and I knew I would die. Get treated for my stab wounds after I was released from a medical center. I soon found out that the woman who stabbed me and got shot and killed was 40-year-old woman. She was named Yan Lee. She had been getting a lot of eviction notices, but she kept refusing to accept it. She also apparently threatened one of the maintenance workers with a knife the previous day before she died. I was able to move on from this incident, but I'll never forget the feeling of having so much pain in your body that you think that you might not make it out alive. The pictures of being a cop, I guess.
Did that really happen? Yeah, it's true.
This chilling true story happened to my sister 5 years ago. Back then, we were both quite paranoid and gullible little kids and had no idea about the world's real dangers. But thanks to the safety of our town, we never really had to experience anything genuinely scary. It didn't really have a huge population. Everyone knew each other in the neighborhoods, and the atmosphere was peaceful and worry-free. There were no robberies, no illegal activities, no problems whatsoever as far as I was concerned. That's why this event shook me completely. My sister and one of her former best friends, who I'll be calling Becky, were going for a walk with my dog on their usual route. It was getting really late. The street lamps were pretty much the only thing illuminating the dark street, and our dog was feeling very thirsty, so they decided to take a shortcut back to our house. This particular shortcut went through dense trees and bushes, and of course, it had to pass by the cemetery. We were always cautious about taking this path, because it was very slippery after rain. But, as this happened during summer, there was no cause for concern. Our dog never likes to stay behind others, so this time she charged forward, and my sister and her friend had to pick up the pace to keep up. As they were getting closer to the end of the shortcut, the cemetery became more visible and more visible. Becky looked around and noticed something very strange, which made her stop in her tracks. A white was sitting in front of her, tapped on her shoulder and pointed her to the woman. Now they both to look, but wanted to keep looking. It was very to see since the closes book and the in there only low their light and she on. They continued, but as not they walking. Finally, end of the he looked at us one more and turned. She and hearing she was and stopped to watch the start happen. We're scared. The dog up and then the around running. This is where I start. Both were okay. While running, my sister
And wake up, Mom. What? But
immediately everything. I put on and ran where they could. Saw them in the distance. We're okay. We all died and talked through. Took Becky. Told Mom everything. There was a lot of scolding after that, but it was tough. But after the lady pursued, they fast, trying not to on anything. Becky was able to back at the clearly under the and she wanted him once and those have any he was clean not once about the freakiest thing is that our dog acts excessively a kind of with other dogs past, barked, or saw her at all. I have no if this was related to natural. Nothing else happened. Occurrence. There's sometimes nightmares about her. Times the one which is up, but she always before what happened.
Even now, time feels horrible. I've tried to live thinking about it again. When I do, it feels so tired that I can't think of story call that time. One time. 6 years ago when I met a man Cameron. I thought he was a good. He ran a and all flowers with him. I found out why he liked flowers so much. I was already fighting him and met me a bouquet. The flowers were always of the quality. They were all beautiful, carefully selected. One day, as he handed me a bouquet, he picked out a few flowers and broke them. Confused, I asked him why. He said, "They're not pretty. I get angry when I see ugly things." His expression suddenly turned murderous. I was startled by the change in his face and froze. Then he looked at me and said, "Why? You're pretty. Don't worry. I won't break you." As he said this, he grabbed my shoulder. His hand felt unnaturally strong. I remembered how he often did arm exercises with dumbbells when there weren't any customers in the shop. Suddenly, I started to feel scared of him. Seeing the fear in my face, he leaned in and whispered quietly, "All you have to do is stay pretty without withering. So please smile. You look ugly with that frowning expression." Then he smiled brightly again and handed me a bottle of water. "Your skin needs hydration. Drink water," he said. That's when I realized he was a psychopath. Goosebumps covered my skin, and I decided I needed to end things with him immediately. Before our next date, I called two friends, Adam and Jonathan, and asked them to watch me from a distance and to help if anything goes wrong. I explained the situation, and they agreed to help. They waited in their car near Cameron's house, ready to intervene when I gave them the signal. When I arrived at Cameron's doorstep, I rang the doorbell. He told me to come inside, but I refused to enter. He came to the front door, confused, and asked me what was wrong. That's when I told him we needed to break up. For a moment, he seemed surprised and stood silently for about 5 seconds. Then, with a bitter smile, he said, "When you say that, you look so ugly right now." Slowly, he raised his hands and grabbed my neck. His grip was incredibly strong. "You were such a pretty flower," he said. "Why did you suddenly change? I told you I didn't want to break your neck." He loosened his grip slightly and whispered softly, "I'll give you one last chance. Do you really want to break up with me, or will you be my flower again?" With a trembling voice, I told him we should break up. Suddenly, he screamed, "I'll kill you!" Grabbing my head with both hands, he started breathing heavily, as if mentally preparing to snap my neck. I screamed for help as loud as I could. At that moment, Adam and Jonathan heard my screams. They ran to me, tackled Cameron to the ground, and restrained him while calling the police. Cameron was arrested, and I later learned that he had done the same thing to his ex-girlfriends. One of his ex-girlfriends had her neck snapped, and she barely survived. Cameron had used his wealth to pay her a huge settlement and avoid severe punishment. This time, Cameron went to prison, and I was lucky to escape with my life. 5 years later, I received even more horrifying news. A friend of Cameron's contacted me and told me that after he was released from prison, he killed another woman and was sentenced to life in prison. Apparently, he had found a new girlfriend. One day, they had a fight, and he snapped her neck. Afterward, he called his friend, crying, and said, "I broke a flower." When the police arrived, they found the woman's body in a bathtub full of water, her neck completely broken. Cameron was pouring water over her head and stroking her hair. When I heard that story, I was so shocked that I had to see a psychiatrist for a while. Even now, I often wonder, What would have happened to me if Adam and Jonathan hadn't been there that day? They saved my life, and I will never forget how grateful I am to them.
My name is Nicola Morales, and today I'll be telling you a story that still haunts me to this very day. I was about 10 to 11 years old. Me and my friends are on a hiking trip to explore the woods. Personally, I wasn't a fan of hiking, but I went along because I wanted to hang out with my friends. At one point, my friend, we'll call her Cassie, and I had to pee, so our friends found a public restroom nearby in the woods that looked pretty abandoned. I, of course, was a bit hesitant at first because it was slightly eerie. But Cass saw me starting to turn back and said, "Would you rather use the porta potty?" Since I would rather die than use one of those, we both reluctantly went inside the bathroom. It was hell. There was trash everywhere, bugs crawling on the walls, and it smelled so bad that we both had to cover our noses. We reluctantly walked to the stalls and each went into one. My stall was somewhat clean looking, but the smell was still terrible. I didn't dare sit on the toilet, so I decided to squat and, do my business. After we were done, we went to wash our hands, but we really didn't want to because the sinks were just as bad as the rest of the bathroom. The sink was stained black and the faucet had mildew all over it. Luckily, I looked in my bag and found some hand sanitizer. But then, as we were using it, we heard the door shut. We both immediately went over to open it, but it was locked. We tried calling out to our friends outside, but they couldn't hear us. Cass started panicking, and I tried my best to calm her down. Not even 2 seconds later, she said she had to puke and ran towards the stalls. I hear the stall door creak open, and then Cass screams at the top of her lungs. I went over to see what was going on, and I found her on the floor, curled into a ball and shaking. I asked what was wrong, but she briefly glanced up at the stall door. I opened the door, and what I saw was so shocking that I fell back onto the ground. Inside the stall was a rotting body, with ants crawling in and out of the toilet and maggots sprouting from the body. Seeing the body was disturbing, but somehow the stench was even more traumatizing. Suddenly, we heard the door unlock. A police officer walked in, but we didn't take time to greet him. We just immediately ran outside. We explained everything we had seen to him, and later they removed the body and took us home. Since the body had no identification, it was buried in an unmarked grave. To this day, I still wonder what happened to that guy, and what locked the door.
I once wanted to share with you. I'm 30 now, but when I was 24, my dad decided to run to a newly built the house first in a row, and was a giant space search. Nothing extra been this relevant later. After I ended up and my mom just my dad and brother his last year already graduated. He was home more often, two of them. So had to get to school and work. So I would be up at night on them. One night I found years to watch and disturbing. I decided my phone is a light on the lights. Aside from the glow from the house dark. My brother sleeping boat standing. Heard someone out. House had the horse amplified. When I found confused, but drugged it up, got my mouth went dead. Under alone. The day until it was getting late. Around 6, I dad and asking when working late. Side YouTube video to pass time. I higher shakily. Wasn't an early. My dresser and bookshelf didn't move. We live near a military base that often does resting. bed sits and slides, and that's all. But when it ends, you can only you're sitting on the different, shaky, visible, and from anywhere. Freaked out. I called my boyfriend in a panic. To this day, I still don't have an explanation for what strange happened before I moved out during the early mornings. Coffee shop and around m to 30. My stepmom of my stepdad moved in. Parking in the was crowded. I had to overflow area empty space with the steamed over. As I was walking to my car, to the empty area, suddenly, I heard someone call my name, clear as day. I stopped and looked to my left, but I didn't see anything or anyone, just pitch black darkness. Terrified, I sprinted the rest of the way to my car and locked the doors as soon as I got inside. Believe me or not, I'm convinced that house is haunted. My dad still lives there, but he says he hasn't had any experiences like I did.
True story that took place in 2020. Me and my family went on a trip to Colorado Springs. I can't remember exactly where we went in Colorado Springs, but I do know we went to a desert on a little vacation activity. The desert wasn't as hot as I thought it would be. Surprisingly, I could probably survive out there for a few days if I had to. It was quite a long drive. I was about 9 years old at the time, so I was in the seat, just sleeping. At one point, my parents woke me up, and to my surprise, there was a desert outside. I asked my mother why we were here, and she said that we were going to look at dinosaur fossilized tracks. I didn't want to complain. We walked into the path leading to a bridge made of sand. My grandfather was teasing me about rattlesnakes, saying that they'll jump and fly at me. That's when I started to get worried. At that point, we were walking across this bridge made of sand. It was about 25 to 20 feet tall. I was walking close behind my family when I paused in my tracks to look at the view. Eventually, I began to look down, and in horror, I saw this 7-foot-tall humanoid creature. Its skin was as pale as the sand. It seemed as if it was trying to blend into its surroundings. It had a hunched back. It also looked like it hadn't eaten in days. I could see its spine poking out. It walked slowly and quietly. It didn't even seem to notice us. It looked as if it was being drawn to something. I stood there watching it slowly walk 1 foot at a time. My eyes were wide, and what I saw really woke me up. I turned to see that my family were already almost at the end of the bridge. I ran over to catch up. Throughout the whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw. Of course, I was a child at the time, so I didn't really know how to react, or if I should even tell anyone. I tried to keep my mind on the dinosaur fossils, and I bet my parents were curious as to why I wasn't so fascinated by science. They knew I usually loved science, and anything rocks or fossil. I couldn't even enjoy this, because I was too focused on my sighting, and trying to process what to do next. I was born with slow processing, so of course, at such a young age, you wouldn't really expect someone to see something strange like that. Now I'm older, and I've now figured out it was probably some kind of mythical creature. And from this day on, I'll never forget that incident. Allow me to describe the creature a bit more. As I said, it was 7 feet tall. It had this hunched back, with its spine poking out. It didn't have long quills, but it did have long arms that almost touched the ground, with long, scary claws. Its back legs were somewhat like a human, and a dog, too. Its skin color was as pale as the sand, but a little wider. It walked at a good speed, swinging its arms in the opposite direction of its legs, just like how a person would walk. It had straight up direction of where it was going, and didn't even bother to look over. I don't think it had ears, which was the strange part. See, I didn't know if it was or not, or what its eyes looked like.
Side note, trying to think of an explanation for what that my mind is playing tricks on. Thinking that I got too much, but that we literally got out of the car, and it would take a while to get. Plus, the sun usually me. I got before. It was some way animal for the wild. So, read, listeners, if you have any idea what I saw, please tell me, and I'll look in to see if it's a match.
No, maybe months ago, something. I sleep in the living room, and I love TV. Sleep. Out a match at the TV around 3 a.m. Fallen asleep yet. At the TV, I chat with my boyfriend while scrolling on TikTok. From sleep, my mother's bed. I can't see clearly. The wardrobe fixed, the TV, and the wall TV on the left. On the I can only see part of my bed. At night, I'm giggling while texting a friend. Thing I heard from his voice, so called. Long after they heard my mom, daughter, embarrassed to ask my what's wrong, what's going on. So they're quiet, listening to crying. I heard what I was. Is she really crying? What did my this time? It was real. I turned the volume, put my phone to focus around, listened more. The cry clear. I started my mom crying, feeling. I told my friend right away. Messaged him, "Hey, my mom crying. What should I do?" He insisted that I check on her. Still unsure, I replied, "Are you sure I should check? The crying sounds vague yet clear. I'm not really sure. Crying? Come on." I kept insisting, so I decided to investigate. My mattress, bathroom, beside my mom. I went into the bathroom, just stood forward to listen. They stood crying, came even apparent when I decided to. I finally looked at her, asleep. Oh, because she was softly. A chill in my spine. I in my head. I went to my mattress. My mom cried. Doesn't ghost or anything natural. Replied, "Yours during thing," but I wasn't at all. Awake, been careful. Lying down. There's just my. Oddly, once I returned to the mattress, the crying suddenly stopped. I hear it again. Maybe my mom was crying earlier. When I checked on her, she was embarrassed. I decided I would ask in the morning. When morning came, I asked her, "Were you crying last night?" She looked confused and said no. What? I was even more confused. My mom believes in spiritual things like I do, so I told her, "I heard you crying from your bedroom last night. I made sure I wasn't hearing things multiple times, and it sounded so real. But when I checked on you, you were already asleep. And after I went back to my mattress, the sound was gone." My mom was just as shocked as I was. I asked her again to make sure she hadn't been crying. She assured me that if she'd been crying or had a problem with my dad, she would have told me. To this day, I'm still confused about what happened that night. That crying voice sounded so real. There's no way it was just my imagination.
Creepy.
Hi, my name is Emil, and this story happened to me when I was just a little kid. I'm 16 now, so this happened around 2014. Just for some context, I'm a Bosnian who lives in the Swedish city of Buras. I have dark brown hair and bright blue eyes. Okay, now on to the story. When I was 7 years old, my grandma used to watch me and my older brother while our parents were at work. We'd usually play with our toys, go to the playground, or watch a movie. And that's exactly what we did every day for the whole week my grandma was watching us. Every day, we would watch one movie before lunch. As we were flipping through our DVDs, we stumbled upon a movie we had only watched once before, The Cat in the Hat. The movie played as normal, and we actually loved it. As the week went by, we kept watching that exact same movie every day since we had gotten bored of the other movies we usually watched. The week had felt fun because of that movie, but little did I know that Friday night would become one of the scariest of my life. That night, I dreamt that I was in my apartment, except it wasn't an apartment. It was a clubhouse, and it belonged to the Cat in the Hat. I had a great time in the clubhouse, partying and eating chips. As I was having a good time, I got a bit thirsty and decided to go get a glass of water. When I went to the kitchen to quench my thirst, I found the Cat in the Hat sleeping on the kitchen floor. I got my water and was on my way back to the party when I made a huge mistake. I stepped on the cat's tail. As I realized what I had done, I saw the cat's face change. His eyes went from being kind and beady to human-shaped, but with the pupils of a real cat, and his smile turned into a long, sharp-toothed frown. Before I could blink, the cat lunged at me, but I managed to dodge him and run into the hall. As I was running for my life, I looked back to see if he was still chasing me, and he was. I ran into my parents' bedroom, where I realized I was cornered. For some reason, my parents had a can of beans in their room. In a desperate last attempt to survive, I grabbed one of the cans at the Cat in the Hat's forehead, open, blood onto the floor. He stared at me, his eyes widening, the words, "Come for me." And just after I opened, I was back in the room. My brother was sleeping on the bunk above me. The following week, I was extremely paranoid. I kept hearing rustling in the bushes, hissing sounds outside my window, and I even started seeing black and white figures around me. Except for the paranoia, my life went on as usual, until one day, a day that still shivers down my spine thinking about it. I was walking to my other grandparents' apartment. Just as I entered the lobby, the elevator was coming up from the basement. The elevator door had a tall window down the middle of it, so you could see if the elevator was full or get help in case of an accident. As the elevator was going up, I locked eyes with something truly terrifying. On the other side of the elevator window stood the cat, this time without his famous striped hat. But that wasn't the only thing different. He was taller, standing at about 10 feet. He also had a huge grin stretching from ear to his face. I was frozen in place, unable to scream. When the elevator passed the lobby, I bolted out of there and ran all the way back to my apartment. Everyone I told this story to either says I'm lying or that it was just my imagination. And to be honest, I don't blame them. Since the incident, I haven't seen the Cat in the Hat in real life or on TV, and a few years ago. Now, around 9 years, I've started to believe everyone else, thinking it was all just my imagination. But yesterday, I started hearing a voice in my head saying, "The Cat in the Hat will make your brain go splat." I'm writing this to get an answer to one question. What was that thing I saw that day? It surely can't be the Cat in the Hat. So what was it? A monster? A demon? Or was it something much, much worse?
Okay, have a bye.